Thank you very much, Mrs. Chairman. This is a very timely hearing, and I'll tell you why in a moment. This is a question I suppose best addressed to Mr. Byard, but also Mr. Alexander, because the question I'm asking implicates very deeply the federal presence. With climate change throughout the country, we're seeing increasing flooding that's been alluded to already in this hearing. There was sufficient concern about flooding here in the nation's capital that we have a levee on the mall that I think Mr. Alexander, the Corps of Engineers, was involved with as well to protect the federal presence. Yet in real time, yesterday we had a disastrous flood in this region, and nobody who lives here or who was here, unless you were in the Capitol and didn't have to go out, could have missed what happened, and it seems to me raises questions in real time about flood preparedness, even in the area of the nation's capital. A portion of the George Washington Parkway was closed in both directions, and to show you just how close or how implicated the Capitol is, water poured into at least one metro stop, and that happened to have been Capitol South, the one closest to the capital of the United States. So everybody, it seems to me, ought to wonder, is anybody protected in the United States if that close to the Capitol itself we could have had such a flood? So my question really goes to a real test. We in the District of Columbia, we're very proud. We have built on both waterfronts, the southeast waterfront and the southwest waterfront. Many areas, of course, build on their waterfront. So this question implicates New York and many other areas of the United States, because the waterfront is a very ripe area for revenue. On the south, by the way, if you go to the southwest waterfront, we call it the wharf, we finished phase 1, but we still, and it looks like the whole thing is finished, but phase 2 is yet to come. We're building on the southeast waterfront called Capitol River. And again, that's ongoing. There'll be another 10 years of building. So I have to ask you, is it safe to build on waterfronts? What does FEMA require? What does the Corps of Engineers require? What have they required of those who are building on the waterfront to make sure that those areas are not flooded with a huge waste to the jurisdictions involved, not to mention to the private sector? Can anybody just build on the waterfront? What do you have to do to build on the waterfront in the United States today? I mean, the waterfront, I have no information that the waterfront was implicated, but I would be a fool to sit here and say that everything is fine unless you tell me that there are either regulations or safeguards that have been required or are required for all who build on the waterfront. And I'd like to hear from both of you since the federal presence is involved. Mr. Byard.
Yes, ma'am. You know, a majority of our population, as you well know, lives on the waterfront. You know, when I was with the state of Alabama, the governor asked me at the time, you know, how do we help hurricane evacuations? And I jokingly said, you know, banned air conditioning 50 miles from the coast and people will stop coming. Obviously, the economic impacts are very, very
you have
good.
to build on the waterfront.
Exactly. So from a FEMA perspective, I would first look at initiatives that were passed by the committee. You know, the incentive to build stronger, in the bipartisan.
So you're telling me that when building occurs on the waterfront, I don't know what you mean by incentives. Those who build understand either that they are required or there are economic incentives to do so.
What I'm saying, and let me rephrase that. Part of the authorities that were granted in the Bipartisan Budget Act that was passed was the incentives to build at a more resilient rate. FEMA has no authority over necessarily over what is built. That is a local and state issue. I would also, you know, as we have a working group that's looking
Well,
at.
of course, you have mitigation authority.
We have mitigation authority, again, working with an eligible applicant. There's not mitigation authority that we can direct or tell, you know, a local business how to build. You know, we would work with the district in that case to see what are the local codes of the district. I don't know that. You know, FEMA's not in the position to know that, but, you know, I would, and I'll let the Corps talk about.
Mr. Alexander?
Yes, ma'am. I'll be quick. You know, as Mr. Byer just said, I mean, the Corps has no authority and oversight on the district or any state or territory.
I can't hear you, sir.
As Mr. Byer just said, the Corps also has no authority under which it can direct the district or any state or locality on what they can build or what they cannot build. But the Corps does urge local governments to, you know, enforce their zoning and certainly enforce building to established codes. If you're going to build on the, you know, on the waterfront, whether it's riverine or coastal, you know, ensure you're out of the floodplain. You may have to do that by standoff or through elevation. It's the major reason that we do shore protection projects along the nation's beaches. It is not primarily for recreation. It's for the protection of infrastructure and the economy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We will now begin a second round of questions.